To learn the truth, would you descend into hell? That's what it says on the cover of the book Grace by A.M. Shine. And this is a horror book that is weird and eerie and strange, and it has local island lore. And now I don't know if this is based on like any kind of actual folklore, but it definitely could be. So it takes place on this island off the coast of Ireland, and I'm probably going to butcher this name. It's called like Cronakila. It's this island that seems like it's cursed. No children have been born there in over 30 years. No one's really sure why. Tourists do not go there. People do not go there. Most boats and captains don't like to go there, except for there is this one captain who will bring them supplies and then ferry people back and forth if they should have need of it. So you have this woman, Grace, and one day she receives a phone call because her mother has died, her biological mother. She was adopted at the age of 4 and raised by a different set of parents on the mainland and didn't ever really know anything about her parents. Like, there was no trace of them. She knew she was adopted, but she didn't know anything about them. And so this priest, he gives her a phone call and he's like, hey, your mother left everything to you, including the house on this island. You don't have to come here. He's like, I can just, sell the house and get you the money, this, that, and the other. Everything will be fine. You don't have to come here. But Grace is like, always wondered about her family, where she came from, her roots. And so she's like, no, I'll come there. And I kind of want to see the house and where my mother is buried and this, that, and the other. And so she decides that she's going to go there. And so she runs a bookstore where they have rare and old books. So there is some weird stuff that happens before Grace leaves to go to the island. And there's one night, her and her friend, after she's closed up the bookshop that she runs, are having some wine, and she hears She hears knocking at the door. But her friend, Carrie, doesn't seem to hear it at all. And she's like, how did you not hear that? What the heck? And then so they continue on like nothing has happened. And then shortly after, there's like a pounding, like shaking the walls. And then Carrie still hears nothing. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Grace is like, is she messing with me? And so Grace like goes to the door, pulls it open. She's like, hello? Nobody's out there. So that was weird. And then her friend had even asked her, she's like, do you want me to come to the island with you? And Grace was kind of like, no, I think this is something I have to do alone. Okay, so she goes to the island. She talks a little bit to the captain who takes her over there, Captain Maloney, and he's a little elusive with what he tells her about the island, and he does answer a few questions, and he lets her know that he does not step foot on that island. He is like, yeah, that's Lovel's island, and even though he's dead, I know better than to set foot on that island, so that's all I'm going to say about that. She doesn't really know what to think about that. And so he's like, yeah, if you want a trip back, just make sure Father Richard calls me or be here next week when I drop off supplies. And she's like, okay, so she's going to stay there for a week. So she goes there, she walks to where Father Richard is at the church, and before she goes and talks to him, she goes to the graveyard where she knows her mother is buried, and then she goes and kind of like, talks to the grave a little bit and says, hey, hi, we never met, or we did, you had met me, but she had no recollection of that. Eventually, Father Richard comes over and talks to her, and he tells her where the mother's house is, and her mom's house is one of the only houses, like everything else looks like it's like all decrepit and falling down and in disrepair, and her mother's house is the only one that's actually painted like a nice, a little more cheerful color, and this whole island seems like just devoid of life and animals, and there's just very monochromatic like grays and just not a very cheerful island. The whole atmosphere is like oppressing almost. What was also weird too was when Grace got there, she heard like children laughing. And that's weird because there's no children on the island. And so she had asked about that. And it seems like Grace may have a ability to see and talk with the dead. And that'll come to play throughout this. So she hears children laughing, and maybe it's just echoes of ghosts or whatnot. So anyways, she goes to stay at her parents' house, and she's there, and it's kind of weird, and she's not really sure what to do, and she's not quite ready to meet the people of the island quite yet. And there's all this like weird history and lore, like about how there hadn't been any children born there in 30 years. And like the whole thing is like, why? And so when you would come into the story, you got a little bit of the background. Okay. So Grace's parents were this woman, Chrissy, and her father, Declan. Declan was an alcoholic gambler. He basically gambled away all their money and everything they had. And so there seemed to be this entity on the island that would give people things and stuff that they wanted or needed, but they would have to, give a form of payment. It seems like a lot of that payment ended up being maybe people's children, and that's why most of them disappeared from the island, which plays into the fact that Grace escaped the island due to her mother getting her the F out of Dodge. It seemed like with her being gone, that curse had finally, like everything had stopped, everything had calmed down. The entity that had taken the children or whatever had happened to them was maybe gone for the most part. But it seems like when Grace's mom died, Chrissy, people started hearing footsteps again and started like maybe feeling the presence of this entity that had come back. There is one girl on the island who is a daughter of this one guy who's around Grace's age that somehow she survived the whole thing where all these other people's families were torn apart and such. And so with Grace returning, that like wakes up this old evil, because it seems that maybe Grace was promised to this entity because her father gambled away all the money and then decided he would just, give up his kid. What a frickin' winner. Anyways, now you have these creepy laughter of children. You have this old evil rising again. And then Father Richard is like, hey, I want you to meet this woman, Harriet, because I feel like she's holding back some information from me. And so Father Richard, he doesn't really know what's going on in the island either, because he hasn't been there that long. And the islanders haven't really opened up to him and told him about what had happened, because it all seems a little too fantastical and freaking weird anyways, and like he would believe it. He tries to befriend people and, learn more about them and try to find out what is the stuff that these islanders are hiding. And so he's like, hey, there's this woman, Harriet, and she's been on this island forever. She doesn't really have any friends, but I feel like she's hiding something from me about the island or the history of the island and whatnot. He's like, she seems terrified. And so, as we mentioned before, the captain was something about like, oh, this is Lavelle's island and I know better than to come on the island, this, that, and the other. And so we have Grace, and she goes and she meets Harriet, and it turns out, oh, Harriet's husband was Valentine Lavelle. And then you get into like the weird history and just the lore of the place, and it's dark and eerie and captivating, and it's such a like a good isolation horror, and it had great characters. I like the weirdness of it. There's so many different things that come into play in the story that are like this crazy, like weird, unexpected tapestry of story that really pulls you in. And I enjoyed this quite a bit. This author has several other books. This is my first time reading them, and I thought it was quite fantastic. It wasn't gothic, but it had almost like a gothic horror feel to it. What happens? Will Grace be able to stop the evil? Can they survive this reawakening of this horrifying entity, which is called a bodak? And I'm not sure if that's like a real thing in Irish lore, so I'm gonna have to look that up. I don't know. If anyone knows, let me know. And it seemed like this entity just wanted, a bunch of the souls of children or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, if you read the book, you'll be able to find out more about it. I don't want to give away everything. It's a great horror book. If any of that sounds good, definitely check it out. And if you enjoyed hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.